we should start talking about this new record of yours, I guess.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's about Detroit, um, because we were going to do a hard rock album. We wanted to do a pure hard rock album. And the home of hard rock in America is Detroit. I mean, Los Angeles had the Doors and Love and Buffalo Springfield, those bands. San Francisco was psychedelic, country, with the bands like, Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane. And then New York was really sophisticated. They had the Young Rascals. Detroit, though, had Iggy and the Stooges, the MC5, Alice Cooper, Ted Nugent, Bob Seger, Suzi Quatro, all hard rock bands, because that's what that city was about. That city did not like soft rock. Bands like Seals and Croft would have gotten killed in Detroit.
Yeah, but you also did have, Motown came out of there, Aretha Franklin, and to this day, Eminem.
Yeah, and the funny thing about it was, back in 1970 when we moved back there, and we're Love It to Death and 18 and those songs that when they broke out of Detroit, really that was where we broke out of, was Detroit. And we would be playing the Grandy Theater, and it would be like the Stooges, Alice Cooper, and the Who. And it would be like 1,100 people, because big bands back then didn't play arenas. They played big ballrooms. And you'd look down and there'd be Smokey Robinson. There'd be one of the Supremes, and there'd be two of the guys from the Temptations, because to them, it was just music. It didn't matter if it was soul music or hard rock music. If it was good, everybody went to it. So Detroit had a really good commonality with Motown. We knew all the guys at Motown. They all knew us, and there was no color involved. They just kind of said, "You're a musician, you're a brother," and so it was really nice to feel free that you could walk into any R&B show and be totally accepted there.
I guess radio even reflected that back then, didn't it? Because you could have Alice Cooper and Perry Como on the same radio station in the 1970s.
There was a top 40. And in order to get in the top 40, we got played on FM, but to get in the top 40, it was sort of like, wow, you're up against Sinatra. You're up against Simon and Garfunkel, and you're the Supremes, and, every kind of music had to make the top 40. So a record like 18 was so punk and so attitude that when they played it, it was different than anything else on the radio, and everybody liked it. So it got in there and the top 40, and all of a sudden that's what breaks you now. If you get on CKLW, that was the big Midwest station, CKLW was, and if you were getting played regularly, you had a hit.
So I guess with Detroit Stories, you kind of time-stamped this album musically with the opening track, Rock and Roll, the Lou Reed cover.
Yeah. Well, that, the thing about Lou Reed was great. I knew Lou Reed. We lived together at the Chelsea Hotel in New York back in the day when it was a dangerous place to live. And Bob Ezrin, my producer, produced the Berlin album. So Lou and I had a good relationship, and so did Bob Ezrin. When we decided to do this song, we listened to, rock and roll, and we kind of went, their version was, at the time, Velvet Underground was New York heroin chic. It was, you and Jenny were just 5 years old. There was nothing going on at all. That kind of throwaway. But that's what was cool about the Velvet Underground and Lou Reed. Now, I said, why don't we take that song, take it to Detroit, and put a V8 engine in it and soup it up. And we put Joe Bonamassa on it and put Steve Hunter on it and Johnny B on drums. And we made it into a hot rod. I mean, it turned into a big, ballsy rock and roll song. And we played it actually for Laurie Anderson, Lou's widow. She loved it. She says Lou would have loved this version.
Because I guess Steve Hunter played on, I think, the Rock and Roll Animal version. That's his guitar.
Absolutely, yeah. Steve played on the whole Berlin album, and it was just one of those things where I've had Steve in my band on and off for geez, 20 years, 30 years. He's probably the best guitarist I ever had in the band. Dick Wagner and him together were like unbelievable. They were like Bloomfield and Bishop, from Paul Butterfield's band. These two guys together you couldn't pick the better guitar player. I personally think Steve Hunter was maybe the more slick, made it sound easier. He played more like Stevie Ray Vaughan. He made it sound so easy what he was doing. And so Bonamassa, in fact, when he came in to play the sessions, he said, I get to play with Steve Hunter? I mean, that was a pretty good compliment, because that Steve Hunter is a guy he listened to when he was a kid coming up. Yeah.
And I guess you were probably a person he listened to as a kid too.
Absolutely. Well, here was another funny story. Well, I have a thing called the Christmas Pudding Show in Phoenix, and it's a charity show for Solid Rock, my Christian, it's a Christian nonprofit organization. Any teenager can come in and learn any instrument or sing or dance or anything for free. It's to find their talent. Find your talent and motivate that talent and get them off the street. And so we have a big show called the Christmas Pudding, and I had Joe Bonamassa come in, and he was going to play with the original band, Dennis, Neil, Mike, and myself. And he was nervous. He said, I'm nervous. And I said, well, about what? And he goes, I'm playing with the original Alice Cooper band. And then I didn't think about that, but probably you're right. He probably grew up on Alice Cooper, Aerosmith, Guns N' Roses, those bands. And so I was just a little bit surprised for him to be nervous to play with us, Well,
the other name you're mentioning there, Bob Ezrin. Now, when we mention the name Bob Ezrin these days, after Alice Cooper came Kiss, came Pink Floyd, but you must have been really the first with Bob.
Oh yeah, we were the very first. Love It to Death was his first production, and Love It to Death, Killer, School's Out, $1 Billion Babies, and Welcome to My Nightmare were all Bob Ezrin, and Alice Goes to Hell, and a bunch of other ones. We probably did 12 or 13 albums together. And then there was a little bit of a space there, and then we did 5 more albums together. Bob Ezrin is my George Martin. He's the guy that I go to as my musical guru. I'll write a song, and I'll send it to him, and he'll say, okay, this B section needs to be longer. This chorus doesn't pay off, and that's how we shape a song. Now, when we're working on a song together, we just sit across from each other going, no, Alice wouldn't say that, or that chord section it's just not right. It doesn't lift. So, I mean, we work really, really close together.
He must have learned a lot of the tools of the trade from you. So what did you think of his production when he went on to do The Wall for Pink Floyd?
Well, he's classically trained. And so that's the one thing. I was not classically trained. So when he would come into a session, he would hear things I would never hear. He would sit there and go, we're going to put a oboe right under that piano part. And I'd go, why? And he says, because it's going to support it. And you're never going to hear it, but it's going to support it. And those are things that I would never think of, Or he would say, I know that you're in love with this B section here, this bridge, but it doesn't lead up into the chorus. Let's take that B section out and use it in another song and write a whole new B section. And to me, I would just go, okay, let's try it. I don't think we ever had an argument about anything,
I think it's just been in recent years, and particularly on the last few records, where we've started to see that original Alice Cooper band that you were talking about before. How different is it working with them as opposed to working with musicians that you gather together for each album?
Well, let's say my touring band, I've got Hurricane Dita Strauss on lead guitar. I've got Ryan Roxy on lead guitar, Tommy Hendrickson. I've got the guy that was just voted best drummer, Glenn Sobel on drums, Chuck Garrick on bass. I mean, I have the touring band. They don't make mistakes, and they are on it every night. We did a show in London, we did 5 shows in London where the band played, and then the curtain came down at the end. And then the curtain raised up, and when it raised up, it was the original band. It was Dennis, Neil, Mike, myself, and one of my guitar players would play for Glenn. And the review said, oh, the show was sparkling. It was crisp. And it was just everything you wanted. And then it got dangerous. when the original band played, they play a lot more dangerously. They just have this thing about them and I sing differently with them. There's more drama, there's more anger, there's more darkness in how they play. And the audience loves that because that's the original Alice sound, So I did this sound and then I did that sound. So myself and the original band have been doing lots of things together. We on the last 3 or 4 albums, they've been on the last 3 or 4 albums.
Mm. Let me just reach into the background here. There we go.
There you go. Muscle of Love. That was our last album.
The original box.
Yeah, pre-stained, by the way.
I love this album. But it ended with this album. So we went from here to Welcome to My Nightmare. Why?
Yes.
I thought this was such a great album. Why end at this point?
That was the first album that we did without Bob. That was not a Bob Ezrin production. And I felt, and the band felt, without saying it, that we were scattered. And you have to remember one thing. Love It to Death through Billion Dollar Babies was our most successful period. We never stopped. We toured for 5 or 6 years without stopping. And we were burned at the end of Billion Dollar Babies. We had already broken the Rolling Stones records, for attendance, and the records were all platinum and blah, 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 went on and on. But by the end of that, we started, okay, let's go do this next album, Muscle of Love. And it was scattered. This song went this way, this song went that way. We didn't have Bob to glue it together. You know what I mean? We didn't have that element. And as good as the album was, we all kind of looked at each other and went, wow, that wasn't what it should be. And it wasn't the producer's fault. It was our fault. And everybody in the band just felt like time to separate, not divorce, but to separate. And I think that's what we did. We know what, there was no blood. There was no bad blood at all. There was no lawsuits, nobody. We just all just kind of separated from each other, but we always stayed in touch, and finally, Glenn passed away. And that right there was like having Keith Richards pass away. If you were the Rolling Stones, he was such a big part of the sound that it was harder and harder to get back together. Everybody was doing their own projects. I was doing Nightmare and I did Hell after that and, all the other ones. But in the last 10 years, we've been doing a lot of work together, so there, like I said, it's very productive now that we're still writing songs. On this new album, we wrote a song called Social Debris together, and I Hate You, a song called I Hate You, which was funny because we don't hate each other, but each guy took a shot at each guy in the band. Mike wrote a verse about Neil wrote a verse about me, Dennis wrote a verse about Neil, and it was great because we all just roasted each other on that song.
Yes. And Social Debris you're talking about came out on your, I think, 72nd birthday the other day. Happy birthday, Alice Cooper.
Thank you. And you're missing by one. I'm 73.
73. Let's see.
I'm proud of it. Proud. I deserve every year of that.
Well, you don't look a day over 72.
Oh, thank you. Good. I feel like I'm 40. I feel great. I've never felt better in my life. And, when this whole COVID thing is over, we can't wait to get back on tour. Between my band and the Hollywood Vampires, both bands are just ready to like racehorses at the starting gate.
Yeah. Well, that COVID sort of did bring an abrupt end to your touring. The very last show that I saw before COVID.
Yeah.
Now, my mate, your manager Toby tells me this is a bit of a collector's item now because we've got the Australian dates there, but
yes,
none of the American dates that followed underneath ever happened.
It was actually the very last show we played in Australia was the big fire thing at the stadium, with Queen. And that, not knowing that was going to be the last show for a while, that's a pretty good way to go out for a year. That show was really amazing. 85,000 people in that stadium, and and Queen are old friends of ours, so it was great to see Queen again, up there. But it's not a bad way to go out if you're going to go out for a while.
It's incredible, isn't it? You did that fire show. We thought that was the disaster that was going to put the past into the past, and then along came COVID.
It was so funny because COVID was not that big of a deal right then. It was just starting, and people figured, well, in a month, that'll all be gone. We had no idea it was going to take over the entire world. I was in Germany, in Berlin, doing a show, and they came to us after the show and they said, we're closing the borders in 24 hours. So we got out of there, and that was March 7th. So we haven't been on stage since March 7th, and that's unusual for us. We're used to doing 180 cities a year,
There's one song on the album, Our Love Will Change the World, which is not one of your songs. It's a cover version. Tell me about that song, where it came from, and is that part of putting a COVID message into Detroit Stories?
Well, that song in particular, Our Love Will Change the World, was a really interesting song. We wanted to cover Motown. We wanted to cover punk. We wanted to cover blues. Oh, that's all Detroit, mostly hard rock. But that song came out of an 80s psychedelic punk band called Outrageous Cherry. And we heard the song and we couldn't get it out of our mind. The song was so catchy, and so I listened to it and I said, Bob, listen to this. This song is so happy, but listen to the lyrics. The lyrics are totally subversive. The lyrics are totally dark, predicting the failure of our generation, and all that. And I went, I love this. This is really, this is a good Detroit song. Let's put it on. There's always one song on every album I do that doesn't belong. And that song sounds like the one song that doesn't belong, but it's just so catchy, you can't get away from it.
The album ends with East Side Story, and I couldn't help but think of the School's Out album and the link with West Side Story there. Am I making this up, or is there a bit of a bookend there?
No, there's a bit of a thing there, because we were all West Side Story guys when we did Gutter Cats versus the Jets. Da 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 da. I said we have to put that in. I want my writing credit right there next to Bernstein. And so this thing, we were going to do a Bob Seger song, but we wanted to do something nobody knew. We didn't want to do Hollywood Nights or any of those songs. And we found the song called East Side Story. And I was from the east side of Detroit. I was from East Detroit. Not one of the better places to be from, but that was where I was from. So when I saw East Side Story, and it was a story about a kid that was going to go threaten people with a knife, but he wasn't going to hurt them, but he was going to steal their money. And the girls going, no, Johnny, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it, Johnny. It was a great story. And I just said, I think we can make that song come to life. Bob Seger, when he heard that we were doing that song, went, what? Why are you doing that song? Because it wasn't a hit at all. And I said, because it kind of tells a story from where I'm from, to East Detroit. So all the songs that we did, we Cooperized all of them, and that song was, I think, a surprise to Bob Seger.
I like that term, Cooperized. It's like Googled. We Cooperized.
Yeah,
we
right.
Googled.
Yeah, it was like the Lou Reed song. We brought it to Detroit and put a V8 engine in it.
I think I'm trying to think back to when I first saw my first Alice Cooper show. It would have been 45 years ago in Sydney. 1977 it may have been. An outdoor show, might have been Randwick or... Yeah. I'm thinking today, like if we did that exact same gap today, back to 1977, going even further into the past would take us to vaudeville. So sure. That would be like in 1977, that would be, if I went and saw a vaudeville act to seeing you today.
That's how Groucho Marx saw the show. Groucho Marx would bring Fred Astaire, Mae West, Jack Benny, all these great vaudeville artists would come to see our show. And they would go, oh, yeah, I get it. They were not thrown off by the shock value of it, because what they saw, the guillotine, they saw the snake, those were all vaudeville bits, except that we put them in rock and roll. And it was a new form of vaudeville. Now, when Salvador Dali saw the show, he saw it as surrealism. He says, oh, Alice Cooper is like a Dolly painting. It is absurd and it comes to life. And, so it depended on who you were and how you saw the show. Some people saw it as a horror show. Some people saw it as comedy. Some people saw it as hard rock. I wanted to be indefinable. I wanted that show to be fairly indefinable. So you really couldn't put it in a box,
Mm. And I'll finish on a final question. We were talking about vaudeville. You mentioned Mae West. You name-checked her, and you worked with Mae West at one point. So
Mae West, I can tell you a great story. Okay, this is a true story. Mae West and I, we did this movie called Sextet. She did this play in 1925 and was put in jail for it because it was too racy, right? When she got to jail, it was all painted pink. They had a double bed in there. It was Mae West. I think she spent one night in jail for it. Okay, so now she wants to redo it. And the cast now is Ringo, Keith Moon, Alice Cooper, Dalton, the guy that played James Bond, right? And all these sort of men that were, and I played an Italian waiter that does a song with her. So we're all having lunch one day. And I said, guys, this is weird, but I got done with the song and she kind of whispered in my ear, why don't you come on back to my trailer? And I'm going, well, because you're 86 and I'm not sure if you're a woman. She goes, oh, I'm all woman. And everybody in the whole thing said, she came on to me too. She tried to get me back in her trailer. And we all went around the table and it got to Keith Moon and he kind of went, and we all looked at him and went, no. And he goes, well, how many chances do you get to be with Mae West? So he went through with it.
Oh, wow. The come up and see me sometime actually comes home to roost.
He came up and saw her sometime.
And with that, thank you, Alice Cooper. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and give my regards to Toby.
Okay, thanks a lot, Paul. We'll see you soon.